a PhD student at the University of Brighton, and I wear other hats as well, which are relevant to this. So one of which is I'm a oral storyteller, and another is that for since 2009 I've worked part-time as a welfare advisor at the Brighton and Sussex Medical School, and I'm going to be presenting two different bits of work I've done. One which is very much sort of practical stuff that I've been doing at the medical school, and the other which is sort of ongoing research which doesn't even really relate more than tangentially to my PhD, but which is something I'm fascinated by and would love to take further. So the med school thing, basically, my background is not in medicine. In terms of a formal discipline, all my studies have been history, and I love history. But I found myself working in student support services at Brighton University and then Sussex and back and forth. And so in 2009, found myself as an advisor in the med school and discovered that medical education is indeed very different from a standard normal university. They weren't just making it up all along. And I was having to get my head around a lot of the various different, sometimes conflicting skills and capabilities that these students had to be able to cover all at once, and then all the professionalism requirements and obligations and things that come in with that. And I realized at an early stage that I was explaining this to myself through the framework of D&D. As a long-term player, most specifically through second edition D&D, because that was the first version of the rules that I learned to play, and I realised that there's something here that could actually be really helpful for the students as like a presentation done to them as part of their induction week. And I tested it out with a couple of academics, and then showed it to some final year students, and it was agreed, yeah, this is something I could do, and it's been a huge success, which has just been delightful. And so I'm asked back to do it every year. And so basically, what I'm going to show you first in these slides is what that presentation does. And I like to think that this is applicable not just to medicine, but to any professional qualification. And one of my friends who's a fellow gamer who works at the med school as a lecturer is encouraging me to write it up. But this is a potted version of the presentation. So I'll start off with this slide, and that's all the students know about it from the timetable of their induction week to start with. It is just a session called What Makes a Doctor. And they have, I don't know if this is standard for medical schools, but they pretty much have 9 to 5 most days of their induction week, freshers week. They are having talks about a professionalism requirement, various different bits of the course, different skills, and it's all necessarily quite serious and going into all the detail. And then I'm there and I say, so you've heard a lot about this. The idea of this talk is to make that digestible for you, to try and make it to give you some tools to make it seem attainable, and that hopefully these tools will be memorable as you go through your degree. And I'm going to do it through an analogy, which is how I had to understand being a doctor when I first started playing. Freudian slip. When I first started learning about it, and that analogy is Dungeons and Dragons. And then obviously there's a laugh goes around the room and things, and you can really play it for laughs, and it's great fun. And I would say, does anybody else play Dungeons and Dragons? And to begin with, you might get somebody tentatively owning up to it, but now, thankfully, more people are owning it in public. And then I go on to look at the character scores, the standard character scores, and I just explain what they are for people who haven't played before. But then straight away, I'll stop and say, isn't it interesting that there are separate scores for intelligence and wisdom? And I'll ask the audience, what do they think the difference is? And just get people thinking about it, and take suggestions. And then I'll refer back to the second edition rules to say what they say the differences are. But all the way through, one of the themes of the talk is there's no right answer here. The General Medical Council does not assess you according to D&D character scores, rightly or wrongly. And so, yeah, it's really just a way of getting the students to think about these things. So then, having established that, I'll move on to the key thing that why second ed is important. This, and I know that's a Pathfinder picture. One of the IT guys at the med school picked me up on it when I first started using it, but it works because I was very keen. This picture represents a fighter, actually. I know it's a Pathfinder cleric, but I was just doing Google searches for D&D warrior, and this came up, and I'm really keen to make the images as accessible in terms of diversity as I possibly could to try and get everybody in the room on side. So I've stuck with this one. And the point that I make with this slide is that in second edition D&D, although I know they've moved on from this now, you actually couldn't pick a particular class if you didn't have the right ability scores for it. So to be a fighter, you needed to have a minimum of 9 in strength. Or to be a wizard, you had to have a minimum of 9 in intelligence. And I'll say, it sort of makes sense to an extent. And the students will nod sagely or baffledly. And then I'll say, but then it gets more complicated, because if you wanted to be a specialist wizard, a conjurer, then you needed to have minimum of 9 in intelligence and something in constitution. To my shame, I cannot remember the exact score you need in Constitution. Maybe somebody can tell me in the chat. And then if you wanted to be a bard, then you needed particular scores getting higher in intelligence, dexterity, and charisma. And then if you wanted to be a paladin, then you needed quite high scores in strength, constitution, wisdom, and charisma. And then I'll confess that this is where I came in with the analogy, really. I was thinking about these kids straight out of school, most of them, who have got to be good at so many different things at once. And I feel sorry for them. And and this is what it reminded me of. And then I'll take the opportunity to talk a bit about charisma, because there's a lot of, as the medical school secretary put it once, very alpha personalities. And I don't want this to just sort of play into the rather toxic stuff that comes from that. Most of my work in terms of talks to year groups as a welfare advisor is about attitude change in a very gentle and encouraging some emotional awareness and literacy, really. But we'll talk a bit about what charisma means in a medical setting, and then I will say to them, if you had to invent character class doctor, which scores would be necessary? And if you really want to go deeper into it, what score would you need in each of those character scores in order to make it as a doctor? And then I just give them 5 minutes to talk about it with the people next to them, and step in and chat to people who aren't talking to anybody or seem like they've run aground, and get some ideas going. And then I'll ask for comments, really. And again, I'll say there's no right answer. And you get some really interesting discussions going, and the people get into it, and they are really starting to think about it. And we'll talk about whether intelligence is more important than wisdom as a doctor. Is strength necessary? What does strength mean anyway? I mean, obviously in the game it's physical strength, but is there such a thing as emotional strength? Where in the character scores does that come in? Different specialisms of medicine. If you're a surgeon, then dexterity might be more important than if you're maybe a pediatrician. You might want more in the way of charisma, something like that. I will always take the opportunity to say, can you be a doctor with poor constitution? And some of them will say, oh, no, you can't possibly. And I'll say, ha. But remember, the General Medical Council say the most important thing is if you are sick, you ask for help and you follow external advice. That's the baseline. And there are, believe it or not, students, there are doctors working in this day and age in this very country who sometimes get poorly. And again, that's part of the emotional literacy that from experience, I know that they need to learn. So then after we talk about that for a bit, then I'll say, obviously, there is no right answers here again. And really, it's about the whole you, the range of scores that you have. And you will all have different strengths. Otherwise, you wouldn't have got here in the first place. And then we'll talk a bit about the party and how actually it doesn't matter if you're not the best in terms of charisma, for example. You've got something else to offer. And it's, maybe if there's somebody who's good with charisma in your team, that's good. And then we can talk about multidisciplinary, multi-professional healthcare teams and getting them to think about how actually the nurses are worthwhile and the physiotherapists and occupational therapists and this sort of thing. Which I should say, the degree course does this for them anyway, but this is just it's using play, isn't it? That's what it is. It's like we've all been talking about. It's using play to get them emotionally engaging with this lesson and not just intellectually. And having talked about the party, I can then bring in the wonders of Stranger Things, which has done wonders for how much people will engage with this because they already recognise something about Dungeons and Dragons. And I'll talk about, as you know from Stranger Things, the party is very important. So think about if you were going into, a really difficult situation, what range of skills would you want in your party, not just in your one doctor? And we can take suggestions and that sort of thing. And then from that, and that's sorry, that slide is more of the same. But then we can go into this wonderful lesson which D&D has taught us, which again is good for their learning of teamwork. That you don't split the party, never split the party. And finding this picture gave me a springboard into all sorts of other little things that I can find on the internet that I could just play out lessons for the students from. For example, they've had to work so hard and be so focused on their own career achievements to get to med school. But actually, now you're here, then you're here with lots of other people who are also the cleverest kid at school. And what matters is how you work with each other. This one I like because medical training encourages these students to they've got to be sure of themselves. They've got to be right. They've really got to be right a lot of the time. Take in the information and make a judgment that they are convinced is correct. But they have also at the same time got to have the emotional awareness and the professionalism to accept that they might be wrong. And that's quite a lot to ask of someone, especially when there's like differential diagnoses and things, and they present a case as part of an assessment and then get told, well, actually, maybe you're right, but also, I'm not going to pass you because you didn't think of these things. It's quite a complex thing for them to get their head around. So this helps with that. And then, because of our role as a welfare advisor, it's always nice to get in something in there about looking after themselves. But then back to them as a first level 1 adventurer or level 1 medical student, rather. Then I'll talk about, it might seem like the medical profession is asking a lot of you. But remember, in D&D, you level up. And nobody's asking you to be a 20th level paladin right now. You can comfortably be a level 1 and you will gain skills and abilities. And you will even get to add 1s and 2s to your own ability scores through your training. And then I'll talk a bit about the stuff that's available on to support them in that and how the curriculum itself does that. And I will say, even having to cope with adversity, much as we wouldn't wish it on anyone, can be a learning experience in itself. And so that is the end of the presentation, and I will invite them to enjoy the ride, whatever happens, and take questions. And generally, I'm really glad to say it gets really good feedback. It stands out in the feedback surveys for Freshers Week every year. And that's, not blowing my own trumpet. It's just really gratifying to see that this idea works. And I've even had people come and talk to me afterwards in the room to say, that was wonderful. I'll really remember that. You made it all accessible, which is exactly what the hope is. And one of the best things was one year when I had a student come talk to me afterwards to say, I'm repeating the year, and I just wanted to let you know, after your talk last year, me and some others went and started playing D&D, and they hadn't heard of it before, and they're